Hello, BookTube. It's the last day of June. July is right upon us, and all of BookTube is making their July TBRs. Optimistic TBRs, super optimistic TBRs, high on cocaine optimistic TBRs. And I've been watching them, and I'll watch them as they unfold through the day and the weekend. And I love them, and I love to partake, but most of the books that I'm reading are no longer in July. I'm reading well ahead into the month, well into the fall. So I can't really do a July TBR. The July books that I will read in July that I haven't read already will be fairly rare. In fact, we'll see them on this channel as they occur. So what I do on this channel instead is a TBR BY, a to be read by you, where I look back and give you 10 strong recommendations from the month that if we were walking around in the news section of a bookstore, I would strongly recommend them to you if they're the kind of thing you're looking for. So I'm going to go down that list, and I want to warn some of you ahead of time that there will be a little duplication. I did a list very similar to this for the inaugural Christian Science Monitor Facebook group, Booksbeat. They did a live stream, their very first live stream, and I talked there about July releases, some upcoming July releases. And some of them I'm going to mention again here. I'm assuming that a lot of you haven't seen that live stream because I think at last count the total number of views it had was far smaller than the total number of you. Next time we do a live stream, the monitor and I, we'll make sure to publicize it well ahead of time to remind you all, and we'll try and set a time that works for a large number of people. But in the meantime, there will be a little duplication, but it never hurts, and I'll put a list of all these things down below, just so you know that these things get my wholehearted recommendation. So we'll start with some of the books that I talked about on that live stream. The first being by Lynn, Vincent, and Sara Vladic, called Indianapolis, which is a gigantic history of the USS Indianapolis. Its crew, its captain, its secret mission to deliver the bomb in World War II, and of course its tragic fate, where it was torpedoed and sank with hundreds and hundreds of men went into the water, covered in burning fuel, no provisions, barely any life rafts, and wounded, some of them just horribly, and also famously made famous by Jaws. They rapidly became the attention of a large swarm of sharks. We don't know how many sharks. The popular lurid accounts had it that there were thousands or even millions of sharks, but the actual first-hand accounts of the men who were taken alive out of the water don't always mention sharks. When you'd think if they were that numerous, they would all have mentioned them. But this book covers it all in such even-handed and wonderful detail that it's a must-have for a World War II reader, especially a World War II Navy reader. You've just got to have it. It'd probably be It'll probably be the definitive work on the subject for, I don't know, forever. I mean, the author's talked with a lot of people who won't be around the next time somebody else wants to write a definitive history. I have a rather rambunctious puppy on my hands here. Here, do you want to say hi to your fans? There's more of them like you than like me. What? There's my little Frida Bean. She wasn't on the live stream, but here she is. Yes. Then the next one is also something I mentioned on that live stream. It's by Ben Goldfarb, and it's called Eager. And it is about beavers. It's a slim, popular natural history book about beavers. Their evolution, their behavior, their society, their achievements, their ecological value, all done by a true believer, a man who not only knows but really likes his beavers. So those of you who are interested in the subject, you're not going to find a better book. So she's vigorously chewing on me because she has figured out that I don't have any sense of touch. And I'm wondering how much I should let it go on, because all of my guests will have senses of touch. I don't want her just hauling off. She's not using any You know how sometimes dogs will play chew on you and they're using all kinds of restraint. They're not biting you the way it would bite a hunk of meat. She's not using any of that. She's discovered that she doesn't need to with me. And she will need to with other people. In fact, I'd rather her not play bite anybody, even with very minimal effort. So I don't know what I'll do. This is spoiling a dog 101, in case you're wondering. The next book also is The First Testament by John Goldingay. And it's an enormous book of his enormous one-man translation of the Hebrew Bible. It's like 1,300 pages long, and it's incredible. It's an incredibly thought-provoking work. He does the introduction, he does all of the notes, and it's an amazing work of scholarship from beginning to end. And a lot of his translations are really good. They're interesting in a way that will make you want to think about and even maybe adopt some of them, which is heresy coming from somebody who loves the King James Bible as much as I do. Then another book, this one you all knew it was going to be on this list for July. It's a work of history. It's called Laughing Shall I Die by Tom Shippey. It's all about the great Viking warriors and warrior kings from the old sagas and from what we know of the history. And it all revolves around Shippey's attempt to explain the Viking phenomenon. These crews who were always they were always drastically outnumbered by any of the forces that they went up against, and they were also drastically unorganized. They weren't rank and file military by any means, and yet they were virtually unstoppable for centuries. And he tries to explain that in terms of their mind frame, which it wasn't so much the men, it was the way they thought about fighting and dying. And it's a really convincing reading. Even if you've read a lot of Viking books, as I have, you will find a lot to make you think in this book. And it's written wonderfully, which is great. Then the next one is the year's best science fiction, the annual collection of science fiction short stories edited by the great Gardner Dozois. This is the 35th version that he has edited, and the last one because he just recently died. So there will be no more. Here, you have to leave me alone, baby. Just for 5 minutes. That's all. It's a terrible shame, but at least we have this volume. It has his enormous introductory essay, and it also has his vision guiding the selection of the stories throughout, which is amazing. I might not always agree with it. I don't often always agree with especially his essays, but also some of his picks. I read widely in science fiction periodicals, and sometimes I'll read a story in October or May, and I'll say, that was fantastic. That was a whole novel's worth of reading in 30 pages. Surely that will make the cut, and it doesn't. And I read things in the volumes that result that I don't think are better. But one way or another, you don't want agreement from an anthology series like this. You want to be challenged. You want to have your own predilections sort of blown out of the water. And Gardner Dozois was very good at that. It's a huge loss that he's no longer around. He's the second gigantically influential science fiction editor to die in my lifetime. I've never stopped missing the great Terry Carr, and I will never stop missing Gardner Dozois, even though I didn't always agree with either one of them. Then the next one is by James Crabtree. It's called Billionaire Raj, and it's about the rise of the super moneyed class in India, right alongside staggering third world poverty. So an income gap that makes the income gap in America look like flat table socialism. It's just the author is angry about that, but also very compassionate and empathetic. It's a marvelous look at the subject. I read pretty much all the books that I can get my hands on about India because I used to live there, and this is a fantastic edition. Probably the best nonfiction work on India that will appear this year. Then the next one is an anthology, Bodies from the Library. It's a mystery story anthology that it's big and it's all inclusive. It's all from the golden age of murder mysteries, and in that it's largely similar to a lot of other products that meet that description. But this one has some unusual twists and turns in it. Like, for instance, newly published stories by Agatha Christie, by Georgette Heyer, stories that haven't seen the light of day in book form since they appeared in serialized magazines, and that's amazing. Also, the the volume sets those newly discovered stories, those newly printed stories, it sets them in a wider tapestry of other Golden Age figures, quite a few of whom have vanished from the literary landscape. And it has the effect of evening out the reading experience so that you encounter a lot of those new names with fresh eyes and a great deal of appreciation. I loved the experience of reading it. And I've read a million anthologies like this, so I was expecting when I started it that, you know, unknown to me, Agatha Christie short story or not, I was expecting that halfway through I'd be thinking, yeah, okay, this is great, but it's the usual suspects. I've seen this sort of thing before, but no. This is an anthology to get. Then the next one is a YA novel from Katy Upperman called The Impossibility of Us. She wrote Kissing Max Holden, which I really liked, despite how predictable it was. And this book is also predictable. It's about a young woman whose family has been rent by the tragedy of having her brother killed overseas, and she meets a boy who they move to escape their grief, and she meets a boy who is Afghani himself, and complications ensue, but also romance, and it's really well done, despite the fact that it's, you know, that kind of Romeo and Juliet type template is the most common thing in the world, and you would think that also would get boring, but it does not. So I highly recommend it. It's every bit as spirited and fun to read as Kissing Max Holden. Then the next couple are romances. The first one is The Duke Buys a Bride, which is by Sophie Jordan and is one of her Rogue Files book. And it starts off with a typically terrific modern Regency premise where a debauched lord is still reeling from a night of heavy drinking when he steps out into the public square and sees a young woman being auctioned as a bride, and he is not thinking about marrying, but he, as a gesture of goodwill, he makes the winning bid. He doesn't know at the time that it's a bride auction. He thinks he's just saving her from public humiliation, but it turns out that the winning bid has bought him a bride. And the young woman never intended to be sold to the highest bidder. She ends up at the auction in a hilarious twist and turn of events that leaves her panicked and heartbroken. But then the novel throws the two of them together, and of course you can see that what started out as a financial transaction is going to turn into something more. But as predictable as that is, you still love watching this. This author really knows what she's doing. And then the next Regency that I want to recommend is by Nicola Davidson. I came across it totally by accident. I read it with my jaw open. It's called My Lord, Lady, and Gentleman. And it's about a younger son, an extra son of a nobleman who is eking a living as an artist. And he's commissioned by a wealthy couple, a noble couple, to do a portrait, a marriage portrait of them. And in the course of getting to know him, the couple becomes aroused by him. Both of them do. And he returns the favor. The result is a Regency romance unlike any that I've ever read. Of course, something like this would fall, in the real Regency period, something like this would have fallen apart in about 5 seconds flat. But the author wrote it with such joy and such conviction that I was carried along. I don't know. I get the impression from the download that I read that there are other books in the series. I will probably have to check them out, because this was told with a lot of energy, convincing amounts of energy. So My Lord, Lady, and Gentleman, I do recommend for those of you who want a romance on the racier side. And then we move to fiction, kind of quasi-realistic fiction. There's been a large influx of that in 2018. Fiction that is not exactly fantasy, where you get the impression that the author would never call it that, and it doesn't hold to many of the hierarchies of the genre, and yet things happen in it that are clearly fantasy. This is a book by Samantha Hunt called The Seas, about a young woman it's a coming-of-age story about a young woman her father walks into the sea one day and never returns. But during her whole upbringing, he told her that she was a creature of the sea, that she wasn't actually like the other humans around her, and certainly she doesn't seem like any of them. But eventually, as the novel goes on, it's very strange. It's lyrically told. She falls in love with what she considers to be a normal human. And then the story sort of blossoms into its own strangeness in a way that, in ways that I found unpredictable and that I very much liked. I've been thinking about it since I read it. I will certainly read the finished copy again when I get it. But in the meantime, those of you looking for a really sensitive love story, maybe a little on the YA side, it's that isn't usual. This is really a book to explore. I thought it was wonderful. Then we have a couple of debut novels. The first one is Okay, Mr. Field by Katharine Kilalea, about a musician who is in a car crash and his hand is shattered, so he can't play anymore. And there's a huge financial settlement because the car crash was, preventable. It was on public transportation, and he uses his money to buy a house far away from anywhere and move there with his wife. And what follows is surreal. It's very strange. It was amazing to me after 60 or 70 pages that I was reading a debut novel, because it's all so controlled. But his world starts to fall apart into a nightmare as soon as he moves. And just keeps getting worse, except there are shards of hope all throughout it. It's hard to explain what actually happens to the main character. But as a debut novel, it has huge scenes that will stick with you. They're just amazingly done. And the same thing is actually true for our next debut novel, which is Early Work by, what's the author's name again? Andrew Martin. It's about it's a totally different kind of book. It's about a feculous young writer who's been, working, the type that you know from your local Starbucks, the type who's been running his hand through his hair and working on the great American novel nonstop without producing anything for pretty much his entire adult life. And an adult life has accrued around this young man of friends and a dog and a high-achieving girlfriend, and all of these things nag at him, give him the sense that he is not doing what he should be doing, and he falls into a kind of on-again, off-again, quasi-sexual liaison with another woman that ignites all sorts of new energies in him, not all of which are healthy energies. And the thing it has in common with OK, Mr. Field is that it doesn't read like a debut novel. It reads with an incredible amount of sentence-by-sentence control of a type that ordinarily has to be learned over a very long haul. I imagine that what's his name again? Andrew Martin has done quite a bit of short story publishing, but nevertheless, the sawdust has settled on this work as a novel. It works as a novel. And so does OK, Mr. Field. In terms of debuts, they both do what I always say I want debuts to do, which is make me want to read more from the author. So I recommend both of them. Then next one is it's a biography of an... That's probably male. I'm going to forge on, though. The next one is it's by Tim Birkhead, who's fantastic, and it's called The Wonderful Mr. Willughgy. It's about Francis Willughby, who was one of the founders of the Royal Society and a genuine crackpot, a genuine eccentric, and also, according to Birkhead, and I believe him, one of the founders of practical modern ornithology, where he and his friend went out into the wild world and cataloged and examined birds, did away with a lot of the old thinking about classifications, about natural history or behavior or biology, and instead dug in and examined it for themselves. And the book makes a wonderful case in very loopy terms. It's a very strange, joyfully written book. It's not a staid biography at all. But it makes the strong case that most of what we built the modern science of ornithology on stems from Willughby. And I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Then the next one is by Matthew Lewis. I don't know that it will be in your bookstore. It's by the History Press, and they have a kind of a spotty track record with disseminating their own material. It'll probably be available to order, and it'll almost certainly be at libraries. And it's called The Survival of the Princes in the Tower. The Princes in the Tower referring, of course, to the nephews of King Richard III, who were seen alive in the precincts of the Tower of London after Richard came to the throne, and then were not seen alive anymore after that. And history, in my opinion, quite correctly, has laid the crime of their execution on their uncle. And his own time did as well, in large part. And it's been a famous bone of contention among historians forever, since it happened. It became stratospherically more famous with Josephine Tey's novel, The Daughter of Time, which is all about the crime of Richard III killing his nephews. And that book, The Daughter of Time, exonerates Richard III. It makes the case that it was all Tudor propaganda, trumping up a case against him that the actual historical documents don't support. And Matthew Lewis, in his own way, does the same thing. Because he posits that both the princes lived. That they didn't die in the Tower of London. And it's, no matter where you stand on the subject, I myself have in this room about 5 books on the subject. I have pronounced opinions. I have studied all of the original material. I have read all of the books. No matter where you stand on the subject of Richard III's guilt or innocence, this book will make you think. It's by far the best Princes in the Tower book in a decade. Well worth your time. I'm not in this particular recommendation, I'm not 100%. Look at the theatrics. Look at the theatrics. In this particular book, I'm not sure that someone who doesn't know about the Princes in the Tower would really be well caught up to speed, but if it is your subject, if you know the period and like it, you can't miss this book. And then the next one is also YA. It's by Erica Bowman, and it's called Contagion. And it like a couple of the other YA, a couple of the other books that we've seen in this TBR BY, the premise could not be more hackneyed. A distant planet outpost reports back in panic tones that they have discovered some sort of problem, that they're under some sort of crisis, and a search and rescue team is dispatched. We meet all the crew members. It's dispatched to go and find out what happened. They get there, find everyone dead, and also find, the bugaboo, the bug-eyed monster of the story. The kind of plot that any science fiction fan has read literally 1,000 times. And once again, the whole rescue here, is the whole thing that rescues the whole thing is its execution. It's wonderfully done. So if you're in the mood for YA science fiction, Contagion is a really good book from July. And then the last book we'll end on is it's fiction. It's been so long promised, so long in the coming, that I honestly didn't think we'd ever see it. It's The Lost Country by an author named William Gay, who does Southern Hicklet noir like nobody. Lays it on with a trowel. And this is a story of a bunch of aimless wanderers in the Tennessee backcountry. It has the skin of a plot to it. There's one character in the backstory of almost everyone in this book, one horrifying character who sort of acts as the linchpin for everything else. But the real point of Gay's fiction is not only his beautiful prose. I can't stand Southern Gothic, and even I have to admit this guy is a master of prose. It's not only that. The real point of it is the hopelessness, just which doesn't sound like a sell for a book, but if you're in the mood for that, oh my God, it's I'm not sure that this novel took 10 years to write, but nevertheless, what a book! Oh, what a book! Have to be in the mood for it. It's grim, relentlessly grim, but nevertheless, if you're in the mood for that, you can't do better in the month of July. And that's it. That is. Sorry for the puppy distraction. She wants to go for a long walk. And that's the reason that she's been pestering me. But it's hot outside. And I know from limited experience in having her so far that the minute she's walked 20 feet in hot weather, she's going to lose her enthusiasm for being out in it and start to give me sideline look to say, well, can we go back now? And anyway, she doesn't really like long walks. I was kind of hoping that she would. But she doesn't really like them, and she doesn't like extremes of temperature, cold or hot, at all. and she doesn't like early mornings. I don't know what I have here. I have an 80-year-old woman instead of a little puppy. But one way or another, that is my July TBR BY. And again, when I post this video, I'll make sure to list everything. These books get strong recommendations, but only if you're in the mood for the particular kind of book. I'm thinking, is there anything on this list that gets a strong recommendation just across the board, no matter what you like to read? And you know, I'm thinking there are. Eager by Ben Goldfarb, his little book about beavers, I think would appeal to pretty much anybody, old or young, fan of nature or not. And also The Seas by Samantha Hunt, now that I think about it. I'd be hard-pressed to think of a reader who wouldn't be drawn in and keep reading. But all the rest of them, fantastic in their own way if you're into them and their subject matter. So that's it for now. I'm gonna walk this puppy for as long as she will walk. We'll see what happens, and then I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.